Why do we keep believing that the next breakthrough will finally solve the problems the last breakthrough couldn't? Why do intelligent people with access to history and data keep returning to the same hope that technology will save us from the consequences of our own behavior? When people talk about artificial intelligence today, I often hear the same tone I've heard many times before, a quiet belief that this time is different, that productivity will rise fast enough, that growth will accelerate cleanly enough, that complexity will somehow cancel itself out. I understand that belief. I've felt it myself, and I've learned to be cautious of it. There is one lesson that cost me more pain than most others. I didn't learn it from success. I learned it from watching elegant ideas fail when they collided with reality. The lesson is simple but not easy to accept. Progress does not eliminate cycles. It reshapes them, and productivity, no matter how powerful, does not erase the trade-offs that define economic systems. It only changes where they appear. When I was younger, I believed that better tools would naturally lead to better outcomes. If we could model systems more accurately, if we could process more information faster, if we could remove human bias from decisions, we would reduce volatility and improve stability. That belief made sense to me. It was logical, it was optimistic, and it was incomplete. I built Bridgewater around the idea that understanding the machine would give us an advantage, and to a large extent it did. But there was a moment early in my career when I learned that better tools don't protect you from misunderstanding the environment you're operating in. They can actually make the misunderstanding more dangerous because they allow you to act on it more efficiently. In the early 1980s, I made a macro call that I believed was well supported by data and reasoning. I positioned accordingly. The tools I had made the position precise, clean, confident, and when the environment didn't respond the way I expected, I didn't question the premise quickly enough. I trusted the sophistication of the analysis instead of the simplicity of the outcome. That mistake nearly ended everything I was building. I remember sitting in my apartment after Bridgewater had effectively collapsed, thinking about how something that looked so advanced could fail so completely. The models were not the problem. The intelligence was not the problem. The problem was that I had mistaken capability for control. I had assumed that because we could do more, the system would behave better. Reality doesn't work that way. That experience stayed with me, and it comes back to me now when I hear people talk about AI as if it were a miracle cure, as if productivity gains alone can resolve debt, inequality, demographic pressures, and political tension, as if speed and intelligence can substitute for alignment with reality. Artificial intelligence is powerful. There's no question about that. It will change how work is done. It will increase efficiency in many areas. It will reduce costs and expand capabilities. I don't doubt any of that. What I question is the belief that these gains will automatically translate into broad stability or painless growth. History suggests otherwise. Every major technological leap has increased productivity, and almost every one has also introduced new imbalances, new winners, new losers, new pressures on systems that were designed for a different pace of change. The printing press, electricity, industrialization, the computer, the internet, none of these eliminated cycles. They altered them, they accelerated some forces, and exposed others. What often gets missed is that productivity is not distributed evenly. It flows through existing structures. It amplifies what is already in place. If incentives are misaligned, technology magnifies the misalignment. If debt levels are high, productivity gains don't remove the burden. They change who bears it and when. I've watched this pattern repeat enough times to know that intelligence tends to overestimate what tools can fix and underestimate what behavior preserves. We focus on innovation because it feels constructive. It gives us a sense of agency. It allows us to believe we are moving forward. But systems don't care about our intentions. They respond to inputs, constraints, and feedback loops. When I look at AI through that lens, I don't see salvation, I see acceleration. Acceleration of productivity, yes, but also acceleration of divergence between skilled and unskilled, between capital and labor, between those who can adapt quickly and those who can't. Acceleration doesn't remove trade-offs, it compresses time. There is something emotionally comforting about believing that technology will lift all boats. It suggests progress without pain. I've learned to be skeptical of narratives that remove pain entirely. Pain is information. It tells you where systems are stressed. Removing it artificially doesn't solve the problem, it postpones it. I don't say this to diminish what AI can do. I say it to place it where it belongs, inside the system, not above it. Productivity is one variable among many. Growth depends on how that productivity is absorbed, shared, and financed. And that process is shaped by human decisions, not algorithms. If there is a principle that guides how I think about this, it's that reality doesn't care how advanced our tools are. It cares whether our structures can handle the consequences of using them. Being able to do something faster doesn't mean we understand what it does to the system as a whole. When people ask me whether AI will solve our economic challenges, I hear the same question I once asked myself in a different form. Can intelligence save us from cycles? And my answer, shaped by experience, is that intelligence without humility tends to deepen them. As I spent more time thinking about this, I began to notice how familiar the pattern felt. The language around artificial intelligence today echoes the language I've heard at other moments in history, moments when a new capability made us believe we were stepping outside the old constraints. Each time the belief was sincere, and each time it turned out that the constraints hadn't disappeared, they had just moved. What I've learned is that productivity is not a destination, it's a force. And like any force, it interacts with what already exists. It doesn't rewrite human nature. It doesn't suspend incentives. It doesn't cancel debt inequality or conflict. It changes the speed and scale at which those things express themselves. There was a period at Bridgewater when we began formalizing decision making into systems. We translated intuition into rules. We tried to remove emotion from choices. On paper, it was elegant. In practice, it was revealing. The systems worked best when the environment matched the assumptions embedded in them. When conditions shifted, the systems didn't fail dramatically. They failed quietly by becoming less useful. That experience taught me something important. Intelligence embedded in tools is still intelligence shaped by assumptions. If the assumptions are wrong, the tool doesn't save you, it accelerates the error. AI is no different. It reflects the data, the incentives, and the objectives we give it. It doesn't transcend them. When I hear people say that AI will unlock a new era of growth that solves our economic problems, I ask a simpler question: who captures that growth? Productivity gains don't automatically become shared prosperity. They flow through ownership structures, labor markets, tax systems, and political choices. Those channels matter more than the technology itself. I've watched periods of rising productivity coincide with rising inequality, not because technology is malicious, but because systems distribute gains unevenly unless designed otherwise. That unevenness creates social and political pressure. Pressure shapes policy. Policy shapes incentives. And incentives feed back into how technology is used. It's a loop, not a straight line. Another thing that concerns me is how easily speed is mistaken for understanding. AI allows us to process information faster than ever before. That's valuable. But faster answers are not the same as better questions. In my early years, I was often more impressed by clever conclusions than by careful thinking. Over time, I learned that clarity usually comes from slowing down, not speeding up. There was a moment after one of my major mistakes when I realized that I had been moving too fast intellectually. I was so focused on what could be done that I didn't spend enough time asking whether it should be done in that way, in that environment at that time. That realization changed how I approached complexity. It made me less eager to automate judgment and more careful about where judgment belongs. AI excels at pattern recognition. It doesn't excel at understanding consequences beyond its frame. That's not a criticism, it's a boundary. When we forget boundaries, we assign responsibility to tools that cannot carry it. And when outcomes disappoint us, we blame the tools instead of the system we built around them. From a macro perspective, productivity growth can ease certain pressures, but it rarely resolves structural ones on its own. Aging populations don't disappear because software is faster. High debt levels don't vanish because processes are more efficient. They may become more manageable or they may become more concentrated. That depends on choices. What worries me is not that people are optimistic about AI. Optimism is healthy. What worries me is the quiet expectation that AI will allow us to avoid making hard trade-offs. That belief delays necessary decisions. It creates a sense that we can afford to wait, that technology will buy us time. Sometimes it does, and sometimes the cost of waiting compounds. I've learned to respect compounding not just in returns, but in imbalances. Small delays repeated over years become large problems. Productivity gains that are not matched with thoughtful adaptation can widen gaps faster than we expect. The system doesn't break immediately, it stretches. There's also a personal dimension to this that I can't separate from the broader picture. As I've gotten older, I've noticed that wisdom tends to increase as certainty decreases. You stop looking for solutions that fix everything and start valuing principles that help you navigate anything. AI can provide answers. It cannot provide principles. That remains a human responsibility. If you're listening to this and wondering what it means for you, I wouldn't suggest changing your life because of AI. I would suggest watching how it changes incentives around you. Pay attention to what becomes more valuable and what becomes less so. Not because you need to predict the future, but because you need to stay aligned with reality as it shifts. Technology will continue to advance. That's not in question. The real question is whether our thinking advances with it, whether we remain humble enough to recognize that no tool removes the need for judgment, responsibility, and adaptation. I've learned that the hard way. As I watched these patterns repeat, both in markets and in my own thinking, I began to see a deeper tension underneath the excitement around productivity. It's the tension between capability and capacity. We are becoming capable of doing more things faster, but our capacity to absorb the consequences of those changes does not expand at the same rate. That mismatch is where most problems quietly begin. In my early years, I often assumed that if something increased efficiency, it must be unambiguously good. I didn't think enough about second-order effects. I didn't ask how gains would be financed, who would be displaced, or how incentives would shift. I was focused on what was possible, not on what was sustainable. That oversight showed up repeatedly, not just in macro calls, but in how I structured organizations and decisions. There was a period at Bridgewater when automation began to change how work was done inside the firm. Processes that once required judgment could now be handled by systems. At first, it felt like progress without cost. Things moved faster, errors decreased, but over time we noticed something subtle. People began to rely on the system in ways that reduced their own understanding. When conditions changed, their ability to respond creatively had weakened. The tool had improved efficiency, but it had also altered behavior. That experience stayed with me because it illustrated something important. Productivity gains don't just change outcomes, they change people. They change how responsibility is distributed, how skills develop, and how errors are recognized. When systems become more capable, humans can become less attentive. That trade-off is rarely discussed when new technologies are celebrated. From an economic perspective, productivity growth has always been a double-edged force. It increases output, but it also reshapes labor markets. It creates abundance in some areas and obsolescence in others. Over long periods, societies adjust. New roles emerge. New skills are learned. But the transition is rarely smooth and it is never evenly felt. I've studied enough history to know that technological transitions often coincide with social strain, not because progress is bad, but because adjustment is uneven. When productivity accelerates faster than institutions adapt, pressure builds. That pressure shows up politically, socially, and economically. Ignoring it doesn't make it go away, it makes it louder later. When people talk about AI offsetting debt or demographic decline, I think about this adjustment gap. Productivity can raise potential output, but debt is a claim on future income. If the gains from productivity are not broadly distributed, the ability to service those claims becomes more concentrated. That can stabilize the system temporarily, but it also increases fragility. Systems become dependent on fewer actors performing well. I've seen this dynamic in smaller settings too. When one person or one system becomes too central, everything appears efficient until it isn't. Then the failure is disproportionate. Robust systems distribute capability. Fragile systems concentrate it. Technology often pushes toward concentration unless deliberately counterbalanced. There was a moment after one of my major mistakes when I realized that I'd been asking the wrong question. I was asking whether the idea was smart enough rather than whether the system could handle it. That shift in thinking changed how I approach complexity. It made me more interested in resilience than optimization. AI represents a powerful optimization tool. It can reduce friction, lower costs, and expand reach. But optimization without resilience can increase systemic risk. When everything is tuned tightly, there is less room for error. Small shocks propagate faster. Feedback loops shorten them. That doesn't mean we should avoid progress. It means we should be honest about its effects. One of the quiet dangers of believing in a miracle cure is that it encourages passivity in areas that require active judgment. If we believe productivity will solve fiscal problems, we delay fiscal discipline. If we believe technology will resolve inequality, we postpone social adaptation. Hope becomes an excuse for inaction. I've made that mistake myself, waiting too long because I believed conditions would improve on their own. As I've gotten older, I've learned to respect the difference between what can help and what can substitute. AI can help decision making. It cannot substitute for responsibility. It can enhance productivity. It cannot replace the need to manage trade-offs consciously. When we confuse assistance with substitution, we create blind spots. For someone listening quietly, perhaps feeling both excitement and unease about where technology is heading, I would suggest holding both feelings at once. Progress and risk are not opposites. They are partners. The question is not whether AI will change the world. It will. The question is whether we adapt our principles as quickly as our tools evolve. I've learned that tools amplify the values of the system they operate in. If incentives are short-term, technology accelerates short-termism. If incentives are misaligned, technology magnifies the misalignment. That's not a flaw of the tool, it's a mirror. When I think about productivity today, I don't ask how fast it can grow. I ask how it changes behavior, incentives, and dependency. Those questions don't produce excitement, they produce caution. And caution, in my experience, is not the enemy of progress. It is its stabilizer. As these ideas settled in, I became more aware of how easily we mistake motion for improvement. When something new emerges, especially something as powerful as artificial intelligence, there's a natural tendency to measure its success by how much faster things move, faster decisions, faster output, faster growth. But speed on its own doesn't tell you whether a system is becoming healthier or more fragile. It only tells you that it's changing more quickly. I learned that lesson personally during a period when Bridgewater was growing rapidly. The firm was expanding, systems were scaling, and everything looked efficient from the outside. Inside, though, I could feel tension building. Decisions were being made faster, but not always with deeper understanding. The organization was becoming more capable, but also more dependent on a narrower set of assumptions. That dependency wasn't obvious until something unexpected happened. When conditions shifted, the very efficiency we had built became a source of stress. There was less slack in the system, less tolerance for error. People were used to things working smoothly, and when they didn't, the adjustment felt sharper. That experience reinforced something I had been slowly learning. Resilience often looks inefficient in calm times, and efficiency often looks fragile in stressful ones. This applies directly to how I think about AI and productivity at a societal level. Productivity gains can make systems appear stronger by increasing output and lowering costs. But if those gains reduce redundancy, concentrate decision making, or compress time horizons, they can also reduce resilience. The system becomes more optimized for the present environment and less adaptable to a different one. Another aspect that concerns me is how easily we project intention onto technology. We talk about AI as if it wants to solve problems, as if it carries a direction of progress within it. In reality, it follows objectives. Those objectives are chosen by people, shaped by incentives, and constrained by institutions. When those incentives are narrow or misaligned, technology faithfully accelerates the wrong thing. I've watched cycles where financial innovation promised stability and instead delivered new forms of instability. Not because innovation was misguided, but because it was adopted faster than understanding could keep up. The lesson wasn't to avoid innovation, it was to integrate it thoughtfully with an awareness of second and third order effects. There's also a deeper psychological element at work. Believing in a miracle cure relieves us of responsibility. It allows us to postpone difficult conversations about trade-offs, distribution, and limits. I've seen this tendency in myself. When facing a complex problem, it's tempting to hope that an external solution will appear, sparing you the need to make uncomfortable choices. Sometimes that hope is justified. Often it's just delay. As I've grown older, I've become more comfortable acknowledging limits, not as constraints on ambition, but as guides to better decision making. Understanding what technology cannot do is just as important as understanding what it can. AI cannot resolve value conflicts. It cannot decide how gains should be shared. It cannot determine what kind of society we want to build. Those questions remain human. From a long-term perspective, productivity gains are most beneficial when they are matched by institutional adaptation. Education systems need to evolve, labor markets need to adjust, fiscal structures need to reflect new realities. When these adaptations lag, the benefits of productivity become uneven and the resulting tension feeds back into the system. I've seen how ignoring that feedback can lead to bigger problems later. Small imbalances, if left unattended, compound. They don't announce themselves, they quietly reshape behavior until the system becomes brittle. That brittleness isn't caused by technology, it's caused by misalignment between capability and governance. When I reflect on AI today, I try to place it within this broader context, not as a solution, but as a force that amplifies whatever it touches. That amplification can be constructive or destabilizing, depending on how thoughtfully it's integrated. History suggests it will be both. If there is a practical way to hold this, it's to slow your thinking even as the world speeds up, to resist the urge to equate acceleration with progress, to ask how new capabilities change dependencies, incentives, and resilience. Those questions don't lead to excitement, but they lead to durability. I've learned to value durability more than brilliance. Brilliance can impress, durability endures. And over long cycles, endurance matters more than anything else. As I sit with all of this, what stands out to me is how often we look for relief in the wrong place. We look for it in tools, in speed, in intelligence, in breakthroughs that promise to lift us out of complexity. I've done that myself. more than once. And each time, reality gently and sometimes not so gently reminded me that complexity doesn't disappear. It has to be lived with. When I think about artificial intelligence now, I don't feel fear and I don't feel relief. I feel responsibility to see it clearly, to place it accurately within the system rather than above it, to resist the temptation to ask it to do what only judgment and values can do. Productivity is powerful, but it is not self-directing. It needs context. It needs principles. Without them, it accelerates whatever already exists, including our mistakes. The older I get, the more I realize that the most dangerous ideas are not the obviously wrong ones. They're the comforting ones, the ones that tell us we can avoid hard choices, that growth will cover our debts, that technology will smooth our conflicts, that intelligence will protect us from cycles. Those ideas feel good because they remove friction. But friction is information. It tells us where adjustment is needed. I've learned that progress rarely comes from eliminating friction. It comes from responding to it thoughtfully, from noticing where systems strain and adapting before they break. That's true in markets, it's true in organizations, it's true in life. AI doesn't change that, it sharpens it. If I could offer something quietly to anyone listening, it would be this. Don't confuse capability with wisdom. Learn how the systems you're part of actually work. Pay attention to incentives. Watch how behavior changes when tools become more powerful. And keep asking whether what feels efficient today is still resilient tomorrow. As I look back on my own mistakes, they almost always came from overconfidence in what I could control and underestimation of what I couldn't. The turning points came when I slowed down enough to see reality as it was, not as I hoped it would be. That habit has mattered more to me than any single insight. Technology will continue to advance. Productivity will continue to grow in some areas and disappoint in others. None of that absolves us from the responsibility to think clearly, to adapt our principles as our tools evolve, to remember that no system, no matter how advanced, can replace the need for humility. If you want to keep thinking with me, there's more to explore. Pain plus reflection equals progress.